Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Alana Rabinovich, and I am just thrilled to welcome you to the third in our series of Giller Prize monthly master panels. Tonight, we explore the art and craft of graphic novels. First, for anybody in Toronto, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and which is also now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I'd like to welcome tonight's panel. 5 enormously talented, creative individuals. First, Johnnie Christmas, Meags Fitzgerald, Lorina Mapa, and Seth. You can read more about them and their work on their individual website and also at Scotiabank Giller Prize. Our host tonight is none other than Michael Redhill, graphic novel enthusiast, excellent writer, and Scotiabank Giller Prize winner in 2017 for his novel Bellevue Square. Audience, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. They will be put, or as many as possible will be put to the panel in the last 15 minutes of tonight's broadcast. So I'm as eager as you are to get to it. Without further ado, please welcome Michael Redhill and the gang.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our master panel on graphic novels taking center stage. I'll very quickly introduce our panelists, some of whom you may already be able to see, but let me introduce them to you in a quasi-alphabetical order, and you can applaud in the privacy of your own home. First, please welcome Johnnie Christmas. He is a best-selling graphic novelist and an Image Comics wunderkind. He has collaborated with Margaret Atwood on their series Angel Catbird, and he lives in BC. Please welcome Johnnie Christmas. Hello, Johnnie. Meags Fitzgerald is an ambidextrous visual polyglot who has created 2 graphic novels, a great number of gorgeous posters, and is also a filmmaker and a drag king. She lives in Montreal. Seth is the justly celebrated author of the comic book Palookaville and the graphic novels It's a Good Life If You Don't Weaken and Clyde Fans. He is one of the country's best known and best loved comic artists, and he lives in Guelph. And lastly, but not leastly, is Lorina Mapa, who is the author of Duran Duran, Imelda Marcos, and Me, her account of returning to the Philippines for her father's funeral, which was nominated for a Joe Shuster Award. She is also a master comic book letterer. She lives in a small town called Hudson near Montreal. So welcome all of you to our discussion tonight. It's nice to have plans at a certain time of day in the midst of this strange time and place that we're living in. So how nice to gather at 7 o'clock all together at once. Let me start off by simply asking you all and just whatever, speak up when you have something to say. How has the pandemic affected your creative process? If it has affected it at all, has it improved it, or has it changed it in any way?
Well, I'll go first since since I'm going to do it. I don't think it's affected my practice very much, although it has affected my home life. My wife is a barber, and so her barber shop has been closed, 3 times, I think now during the pandemic. So it has changed the nature of what it's like around the house. She's home all the time now. But I have a studio in the basement, and I go down to my studio every day, as I always have. I think that if I wasn't married, I probably wouldn't even have noticed there was a pandemic because I never leave the house anyway. So, but it's had a big effect on her. And because of that, of course, it's come into my life.
Right. Irina, I overheard you say earlier that you have 4 children and a husband in that house and that you are working in the basement. So what kind of effect has it had on your process?
Actually, it's been good in that I feel like I have more time because usually the kids are involved in all sorts of activities, soccer, and I myself play. And with the pandemic, suddenly no going anywhere at night. So that freed up a lot of evenings. So I did find myself working more on my my current book that I'm working on, which I really needed to do. So it's
Right.
been great.
And how about you two? Has the dread and worry at all affected your concentration, or has it given you new subject matter, for instance? Megs?
I'll go. Yeah. I've found it really hard to work on comics during this pandemic because I was already working from home full time all the time. And I really relied on the few weekly things I had outside of the house to kind of ground my sanity. So I used to train 5 times a week as an amateur circus artist. And then I also, as you mentioned, perform as a drag king. And so I was doing a couple drag shows a week. And it was really those times with other people that would charge me up so that I could spend 14 hours by myself. So now that I'm in a situation where I'm just by myself and I don't have that outside outlet, I have found it really difficult to have the focus to actually and the discipline to sit and write and do stuff. So I've spent a lot of time focusing on drag this pandemic rather than on comics because it feels naughty, if that makes sense. Like it feels like I shouldn't be doing this. I'm not doing my homework, like the thing I ought to be doing. Instead, I'm doing that fun thing instead. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, I like most cartoonists, I don't really go very many places anyway, so it didn't affect kind of my day-to-day sort of, but it has been cyclical in terms of output. Like at the beginning, I had this surge because all of a sudden there was all this free time that you can just do stuff with. So I got a lot of work done then, and then there was kind of I think much like what Megs was saying, there wasn't an outlet after so you can get creative and you can like really like go for it, and then you find your friends and you bounce things off people, and then you kind of like reconnect to the world and then come back to it, you know. So I had to kind of get my footing again, but it didn't really slow down any work, but it was kind of odd. And now I'm kind of coming back around again, where it's I'm like, just as the pandemic's hopefully coming to an end, I'm getting used to it. So the surge is coming back on again.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see what happens when the world goes back to what it, or becomes what it becomes, and how work readjusts to that as well, because it's gonna be interesting. So,
well, as lonely workers, whether you're writing novels or drawing comics, having one's social life further curtailed is not necessarily a bad thing. However, in our household, and perhaps in many of yours, we're living in terror of the tsunami of social obligations that are going to come our way, because we're all so out of practice right now. I mean, we want it, but still, it feels like, I don't know how do we have conversation again? All these things kind of evade me.
Like the spatial geography of handshakes is going to be like super weird. They're going to like not used to like stopping at the appropriate place, and be hitting people and missing people and stopping short. It's going to be weird.
Yeah.
It is funny, you know, even though I don't, you know, I spend a lot of time here at home, the pandemic, it's like it's changed how we think about interaction. I'll be watching an old movie from the 40s or the 50s, and I'll be thinking, gosh, those people are standing close together. Or, you know, it's like suddenly you're imposing the pandemic rules on culture in a way that never even crossed your mind before.
It's very strange. You watch the Magnificent Ambersons and you think, oh my God, they're all going to get sick and die.
Exactly.
And remember how at the beginning, if you saw a commercial or something and somebody hugged somebody else, there was hanged. I was like, oh God, touching another human being.
Oh, you know now, like with culture, you watch a commercial, you know it was filmed before the pandemic, because they'll show people hanging out together in a restaurant, or they'll say like, you know, I'll meet you on the patio or something. And you just know like, oh, they filmed this before the pandemic.
Let me ask you one more pandemic question, panelists, and that's that, you know, we are living in a time where we are steeped in dread, and the fact and reality of death is around us all the time. Has any of this mood made its way into your creative output or your interests? Has the mood sunk into your work in any way? Let me start with Rena.
Not really. I've always been really pragmatic about the whole thing because I had two kids who were always, working, essential workers, I suppose. So I knew that there was every chance they would bring things back in the house. And so from the very beginning, we were already set that, well, if we get it, we get it. Try not to get it, obviously. And I guess as a result, I just looked at everything very practically and wasn't really afraid or
Okay.
handled it in that way, and just kind of, well, that's what you got to do. And it's part of every, how it is with taking risks with everything in life. So no, it didn't really affect me in that way of looking at mortality in a different way.
Johnny, how about you? Any of this leak into your imagination?
It found I was not going to have it affect my work at all. I'm writing a comic series called Tartarus, and I had a pandemic planned in it for like a year ahead of time. And then as the pandemic started right around the time that I was writing the issue. So I was debating whether I should like pull it out because I didn't want, but I didn't want it to have some weird butterfly effect where all these things that I planned just kind of, where I didn't foresee like, oh, yeah, that's going to throw the whole thing off. So I kept that in, but I thought, well, I'm going to try not to have it leak into anything else, this current one. The other one was, what I was thinking of 1918 the first time around, or 17. But now I found that the thing that I'm currently writing, it's sort of starting to kind of moonwalk its way in backwards into it in these little pockets. And I tried to resist it for a bit, and now I'm just kind of like, well, it's working really well creatively. Like it's connecting all the dots. It's relatable, and it's not what it's about, but there are little touchstones that are. I mean, it's kind of a gift as an author, because I find one of the challenges is trying to relate to someone, trying to have that touchstone of relatability that you can leap off with your fleets of fancy and all the ideas, and people know where you're going. So it's going to be helpful in that way, but I didn't want it to happen, but it's happening. But I'm not writing about the pandemic, but it's.
I would hate to be a speculative writer right now, a speculative fiction writer, because reality just is, lapping you day after day. But Meags, how about you?
Yeah, I have been working for some time on two books concurrently, and one is nonfiction and one is fiction. And I have never yet published a long work of fiction before. So this book will be my first one, and it's sort of lower priority on my agent's list anyway. It's sort of the thing I dabble on from time to time. And I found when the pandemic struck, particularly here in Montreal, where it struck very soon and very hard, that I just was so discombobulated by it all that I haven't really been that interested or that able to work on the nonfiction book. It's felt too, I don't know, like if academic's the right word, but it's very research driven, and I just haven't been in this analytical headspace. And instead I've been much more, driven by emotion. And so instead I find myself working on the fiction book and kind of coming to it in bursts, like it sounds so cliche, but like waking up in the middle of the night with all these ideas and like, I got to write this all down before I forget. And then going back to sleep, and in the morning trying to decipher the notes, being like, okay, some of this was genius and some of this was garbage, and I can use this and not use this. And I've definitely felt that this whole awful experiment of the pandemic has really affected how my creative brain is working.
Thank you, Meags. And one more question. Do you have a cat?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I meant to apologize. She has settled by the window. She likes to be in front of me, and she just couldn't decide if she wanted to be in front of me on the left or in front of me on the right. And
she appears in your videos too.
She does. She appears in many of my videos.
Check out Meg's videos on her website. They're quite amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Seth, how about you? Are you getting pings from reality in your work?
My whole life has been built on retreat. It's like I've been trying to escape from reality for most of my adult life. And I've built a pretty solid little like artificial world I live in. But it's funny, you know, in the last few years, I've probably been more involved in what's going on in the world than I have ever been. I mean, those years of Trump and the George Floyd situation and the riots and the protests, the pandemic, the Me Too movement, these have been very, very potent years. And they have really, like, I've been really aware of what's going on and actually paying attention probably more than ever. And maybe this isn't like really something I should be proud of. It's not pushing me to be more involved in the world. It's pushing me to retreat even further. My work is really built about this like idea of living inside of a kind of little precious bubble. And I am certainly shoring up the bubble around me. When Trump got on that helicopter, I closed a big door and like said, like, I got to get away from the internet for a while. And I felt much better in a way as I stopped paying more attention. Now, of course, I'm still paying attention. You can't live totally in a bubble, but I'd say that my work is getting more, I'm retreating into a farther zone of fantasy with my work, trying to create some little perfect place away from all this cultural chaos.
That sounds like a good project to have right now, Seth. Somewhere perfect.
It's working for me.
Let me ask you all, just to kick around, you know, you're all novelists of one description or another. And I'd like to know, when it comes to graphic novels, are you driven by words? Are you driven by images? They come at the same time. How do you, as visual artists, balance the needs of the story against the graphic needs of the way you tell stories? Just anyone.
When I was a kid, what's interesting, the words came first. Like I was always a kid who drew. All kids draw, but just some of us never stop. That's just the difference. But I noticed the words were the first things that I kind of, I felt something different about, you know, the order of them and how to craft an idea with them. And then I kind of lost that and went into the full visual thing. And then, you know, fast forward to now, I find that when I'm crafting stories, it sometimes it depends. You know, sometimes an image will come, and then that will kind of like a handkerchief out of a hat. You know, more and more ideas it'll draw. But sometimes it's the words, and sometimes the words will bring about something. But I would say for myself, I would say 70 to 60% of the time it's images, and then kind of words, and then words take over for a huge chunk, and then I come back in layer.
Oh, so it is a layered kind of process, eh? There's pictures and words, and then you go back and forth to try to make them agree with each other. Like, is that the process you're talking about?
For me, yeah, it feels like it really does feel left brain, right brain. It feels like I'll do a draft with words, and I'll come back in and do a kind of a rewrite visually. But even when I'm writing, I'm thinking visually. So my scripts are very visual because I'm a visual artist. So so I'm writing visually. I'm not writing so much dialogue until after. I put dialogue in after to sort of shore up things and to make things pretty. But the writing is all visual, whether I'm drawing it or if I'm.
How about you, the other guys out there?
Well, I think in sequences. It's like, I don't really think in like words or pictures when I'm planning out a story. I imagine this is the way most writers probably think. You think like, oh, that would be really interesting if my character has a long conversation with somebody out on the pier. And then you wonder like where that fits into the book. And then you might think, oh, there's another sequence later where his mother dies, and that's a long sequence or whatever. And then later, when you're actually, I find like for myself, when I'm putting things together, like comics is a funny language because it's not words and pictures. It's kind of this strange combination of the two. And the drawing is the writing. So when you sit down and you start drawing those pages, that's where you're doing the real writing. Like, sure, you've got an arc in your head and you may even have broken it down. You may even have written out all the dialogue, but somehow when you're drawing it on the page, some kind of like weird magic occurs where serendipity creates what's happening on the page. And suddenly it comes alive in a way you didn't anticipate. And you go, oh, I didn't realize this, like these shapes that I'm creating on the page, these things I'm moving around will connect with each other. And the last panel will be important with the first panel. And in some strange, there's a kind of a, well, I'm sure this is even true when you're sitting down and writing prose. Things just happen in the process that you don't expect. And that's where like the subconscious part of your brain really brings it all together. And with the drawing, it's just another layer of surprises.
Okay. Does this sound like familiar to you, Megs or Rita?
I feel like I have two very different processes depending if it's fiction or nonfiction. You know, if it's fiction, then I feel like sometimes the words take over in a good way, where you're kind of thinking more almost in a poetry mindset at times, and it's coming from a much more emotive place. So there's sort of this back and forth, and even the title of my new fiction work is called The Weeping Wounds, and it's like the whole idea for the book came from this term. I got wow, I'm going to tell this story. It's a little bit gross, okay? but that'll be interesting. This was like years ago. Harper was still prime minister, and this is the gross part, brace yourself. I popped a zit on my face, and you know, sometimes when your zits like ooze a little afterwards for like a long time after you've popped it, I was thinking, I was like, this is like a weeping wound, like it just keeps giving. And then I went on this long walk, and I was thinking about something Harper had done that upset me, and then I went back to this phrase of weeping wounds, and like I was just, these like ideas merged where I was like, the idea of a weeping wound as a person and as a signifier kind of like came into the hold, and then I developed this whole big you know, fantasy type world around this idea. So in that instance, you know, words really led the whole concept. It all came from this gross little nugget of real life. But I think a lot of the time I am mostly known for writing nonfiction, whether it be short or long comics. And to me, that's a much more by the book process. You know, it's so easy when you write nonfiction to overload too much information. And I think sometimes I am guilty of that, and I have to pare it back. You know, you have your script in one document, and then you lay it in InDesign or whatever program you're using to actually lay out your comic. And you're like, oh, I actually only need half this many words, because as soon as it's paired with an image, half these words are now redundant. But it's much more of like a calculated balance rather than like an instinctive thing when it's nonfiction.
Okay. Have you anything to add, Rita?
I guess my favorite part when writing is breaking down the story. I guess I imagine it all in my head, like watching a movie. And the fun part is to, it's words and pictures at the same time, much like what Johnnie was saying. Like I know some people, they actually write a script, and then they transform the script into art, but me, it happens at the same time. It's like simultaneous, and that really is my favorite part of and it's like what Meg said, you have a lot of stuff, but then you have to pare it down. Mm-hmm. And it's challenging, but it's also fun. You have to be self-disciplined, like editing, you know, like you have to self-edit and decide how much to keep and how much to go, how much is too navel gazing, how much is too self-indulgent. And to me, that part is really fun, because you have to, it's like you're writing for yourself, but you also have to be aware of your larger audience. And I find there's a self-discipline in that.
Yeah.
So
Everything that you guys are describing is familiar to me as a novelist, because you work on something that's long form, and of course you want to get everything that you love about it in, but then you're faced with the problem of structure and unity and pace and all the craft-based things that your readers expect from you. And so you have to learn over time to control yourself, I guess. And you just mentioned, Rena, navel gazing, which is a nice lead for me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, because one thing I find fascinating, like in my own cohort, you know, there's a lot of talk of autofiction, novels that are based sort of pretty closely on the lives of the authors. We have, you know, different authors who claim to belong, who do belong to, like Rachel Cusk, for instance, or Sheila Heti, who are writing novels that they are fictions, and yet they hove so closely to the lived life of the author that it really brings into doubt what's real and what isn't. And you know, the auto fiction writers of today did not invent it. You know, Philip Roth, writers of that ilk in the 60s and 70s who were interested in gazing at their navels, you know, broke new ground on that. But one thing I find fascinating is that, you know, Portnoy's Complaint came out after Zap Comics #0, right? Like comics broke ground on self-awareness, on self-examination, almost to an uncomfortable degree. So I'm curious to know what you guys think about this, particular to the form of the graphic novel or independent comics or whatever box you want to put it into, that lends itself to turning the microscope back on the artist.
Well, I think comics are really a very personal art form. It's funny, you know, they're a very simple art form, and one person can make it. And so it's like, much like writing a prose novel. I mean, it's an ideal form for producing personal work. I mean, I can see why there aren't a lot of big movies that are, you know, autobiographical movies. It's like you got to have 60 or 80 people working on it with you. It tends to push towards a more professional kind of slick product. There's something about comics, which up until recently has just been a pen and a piece of paper, that really lends itself to like diary kind of focus. It's not surprising that it turned into like a mainstay of like the art comics movement. I think that, I mean, for my generation, one of the big reasons why there was so much autobiography is that we all grew up reading fantasy comics. And when you wanted to like create art comics, in quotes, you had to figure out what the hell they were. And one of the big things you realized was you didn't want them to be fantasy. So you did the exact opposite, which was to try and make the most real comics you could, which were usually based on your own life. But that's really changed. I think in the generations since I started out, young cartoonists now don't worry about that anymore. You know, half the young art comics cartoonists are doing comics about elves. You know, it's like, it's perfectly fine to think about anything you want now, because to some degree, people have recognized you're no longer defined by Spider-Man or whatever anymore. Comics are comics. They have a wide vista. So, but I do think they're a wonderfully intimate form.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, to add to that, I think also, especially when you're starting out and you're looking for ideas and content, your own story is a free story to tell. You know, it's the one you have the easiest access to. And I didn't actually intend when I wrote my first book to make it so autobiographical, but I realized that I needed to have some sort of narrative arc to accompany all this research that I was writing about. And so just sort of naturally, I was like, well, I'm going to become the subject matter of the book in part, just to kind of support this story. And then audiences really received that very well, much more than I realized. You kind of recognize that really strong bond you can have with people when they've just spent 10 hours reading your book and you're this full-fledged human to them. And I didn't know this term at the time, but parasocial is the type of relationship that is, where someone feels like they know you, but you don't know who they are. And I had a lot of these really intimate connections with people at book festivals where they're like, oh, I drove 5 hours to be here to get you to sign my book, and that kind of thing. And so that encouraged me to write more strictly traditional autobio work. And again, the next autobio stuff I did really came from a place of I have access to this story, and it's easier to tell my own than tell somebody else's. So
Great. Now, Johnnie, I know a lot of the work that you're known for is, for lack of a better word, kind of more genre stuff. But have you done work that is that's drawn more from your own life?
It's interesting that it's almost the reverse of what Megs is saying. I love autobio work. Like it's probably the stuff that I go to the most. If I see a comic on autobio, I'll grab that. But in terms of creating it, like I've always been a little like I've created it for myself early on. Those were first stories I went to and started kind of crafting and using my free story. But I couldn't show those to people. Like I felt a little shy about it. Maybe, I don't know. I thought the stories were well crafted, but I just so I always felt more comfortable telling a story that was more allegorical, with using other characters and other kind of scenarios. And only now am I coming back around to telling stories that they aren't autobio, but they are more they're hewing closer to actual events in my life, but masked, with other characters, scenarios, and situations. So it's interesting. I don't know if I'll ever get there. I don't think I will, but I would like to, but I don't know.
Well, just what fascinates us as artists is a form of autobiography anyway, even if it doesn't end up using the first person pronoun. What you choose to focus on is a form of autobiography, I think. And Rena, your memoir of the Philippines and your father's funeral, obviously very closely drawn on real life. How does it feel to expose yourself that way?
It did feel strange. I guess it's funny because when I see people writing about tragic events like on Facebook or something, to me that seems so, how could you do that? Because I couldn't do that, and yet here I made a whole book about it, and the whole, everyone can read it. So it's kind of strange in a way, because I still wouldn't be able to express myself in that way on like a social media platform, but in a memoir, graphic memoir form, it's like just everyone can read my story. So it's a bit of a strange feeling, I suppose. Also, when I was writing it, to be honest, I did hope it would see publication. I wanted others to read it. I started off writing it mostly just for my kids, so they would know where I came from. It was a response, as you mentioned, to my dad's death. But then at the same time I was writing it, I did think, I should make it so that everyone can read it. And I'm glad I did, because in the end it was published. Part of me was nervous about that. And then, at the same time, you want to write the truth. And you don't want to just gloss over stuff, even if other people are involved. For myself, I don't mind being upfront about everything, but it's always the people close to you that you're not sure how they would feel about what they would say. So that's always the conundrum with me. Whereas with myself, if I was just writing completely about myself, my own feelings, my own thoughts, for some reason I could be very open, but it's always everyone else around me who I have to skirt around.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we could all write down our most private thoughts and just keep them to ourselves.
Yeah.
But we all want to publish. So what is that? I mean, it's too simple to call it a kind of narcissism. What is it about wanting to put yourself out there? I mean, you eventually encounter your readers and your fans. Is that do those encounters fulfill part of your need as artists?
If I could just keep going on, then I'll finish.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, well, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry about that.
Oh,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Someone else do it.
Didn't mean to derail you.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Well, words. Yeah, no, that gave me a thought. The start of my new nonfiction book so the book is about the history of single women throughout time and around the world and the contributions that they have made to society. And it starts with this short autobiographical comic, and that comic is called Heartstrings. And so the idea of that comic is about how, as a single person, and if you've had this big breakup, I had this sort of metaphor where I felt like I had this huge cord from my chest that had been severed, and you're untethered from the world from this big breakup, and you don't really know where you live anymore, and you're floating. And through my comics and through making the work and making connections to other readers and fans, and knowing that so many people had read my work and made a connection to me, I sort of re-envisaged that previous one giant cord that used to go to somebody else is like a million little strings that go out to everywhere in the universe, to where all of the people are. And for me, I think that's what it's about. It's not about, someone praising you when at a book signing, but it's about knowing that you've made these connections, whether they're affirmed or validated or not, like through an interaction. They're real. It's part of what makes you human.
I would say that for me, it feels like whenever you find something really cool and you want to show a friend, that's kind of what it's like for me, more so than anything else. Like, you'll have this idea, a cool thought or something, and then the craft of creating it into a book is kind of the fun part, where you kind of go away and you refine these ideas, and you kind of to touch on a little bit what Rena was saying about saying things on social media versus writing a whole book. Like, I always find it magical that people can be that pithy and very quick like that with their thoughts, and just concise, to the point, very quick, on the spot. Whereas I need to sit, refine, edit, go over it, look at it, re-examine it from a different point of view. So I'll take this idea that I think might be real cool to share with someone, refine it. That's called making a book for me. And then I go, hey, isn't this cool? This is I think this is interesting. Do you think it's interesting? And hopefully in that process, finding the people who find the same things interesting that you do. And, perhaps it's trying to find making a bond or connection.
Seth, how do you like being public? Because of the four of you there, I think you've probably had to deal with the public more. Does it nourish you, or do you just have a special paragraph that you repeat in public?
Yeah, I'm not nourished by the public in any way, shape, or form. It's part of the job. You got to go talk to people, but my life's here in the studio. I really relate to what Johnnie was just saying, and that essentially, why do you do the work? You do it because you want to share something. But why do you want to share anything? Like, what's the point? I do a lot of work that I just put in the closet too. I think the purpose of it is that there's some impulse in human beings that we have this really strong desire to try and share our experience of who we are and being alive. And it's really hard to do it in your daily life. There'll be lots of times where I will feel a tremendous amount of emotion about something down in the studio, and I'll come up the stairs with this kind of intention to talk to my wife about it, but I kind of feel it dissipate as I come out into the real world, and I realize I can't really just talk about it. There's got to be some other way you use this material, and the way you use it is through the work. And it often comes out in a kind of in a disguised form. So even when you're doing autobiography, it's totally disguised. There's no bigger liar than the autobiographical writer. When I'm writing fiction, I'm more accurate than when I'm writing autobiography. There's a great little short story that Borges wrote where he talks about the two Borges. The Borges that takes everything from his life and puts it out there and exaggerates it and lives off of it. And then the real Borges, who is lost, who's losing everything to the fake Borges. And that feels totally like what it feels like to me. It's like there's some process where you exaggerate, you bend, you twist, and you get this experience out there. And somehow in the end, that's the closest way to share what's going on inside your being than to just the direct way. Just sitting down and trying to talk to your friends about what's going on in your life, that seems the least possible way to share the human experience.
certainly more chaotic than when you have the opportunity to sit down and form it and shape it and edit
Oh
it
yeah,
and to deliver the meaning the way you want it to be received.
absolutely.
I know it feels like only 10 minutes have gone by, but we're at 7:40 now, and I'd like to invite audience members to put questions into that Q&A box, which is down on the right-hand side of the lower part of your screen. And I believe that Emma Truax is going to be doing a little bit of culling so that we can propose some of these questions. But before we collect all those, let me end off the official part of the discussion by asking you each in turn to perhaps tell us about a lost classic in comics, an artist or a comic book or a graphic novel you wish had more readers, whether or not it was published 50 years ago or 2 years ago. Just a shout out to something you love.
I'm prepared.
Aha.
I was looking at this little book while you were talking. This is a little book by a guy, not this particular book, but I just pulled this off my shelf while we were talking. And the artist behind this is a guy named Jonathan Bennett. He's a New York cartoonist, and I don't think he's done anything in about 10 years, but he used to produce a fair amount of work with Fantagraphics books. I think he had stuff in Mome magazine, M-O-M-E, and he was great.
Okay.
So
well,
Jonathan Bennett.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? New discoveries,
Well,
touchstones?
I'd love to like always do a shout out to, it's not really new discovery or an unknown work, but it's just something that I love so much is the Love and Rockets magazines by the Hernandez brothers.
Yeah.
If anyone hasn't heard of them yet, who's watching this, you must go and check them out. I mean, they're absolutely brilliant.
Well ahead of their time too.
Well ahead of their time, exactly. I mean, if you read them now, they're as fresh as ever. So
I have one right here. Oh, Megs, what's your answer?
I think that probably most of my very favorite books are ones that have already received a lot of
Nice.
attention and accolades. But if I'm thinking about kind of an obscure gem from years ago, I remember being at Forbidden Planet in New York, I don't know, 15 years ago, and I found this book by a writer named Austen English. I could run to my bookshelf, but it's too far away. But and it's one of these like roughly drawn in pencil crayon sort of gems, and I've never found anything else like it. And it's just like one of like those things where it's just like, who are you? What did you do before? What have you done since? But you bought it for $5 out of the bottom of a rack, and it's like one of my treasured comics.
Austen English.
Yeah.
Okay. How about you, Johnny?
What comes to mind is Los Tiempos Finales by, he used to go by Sam Heaty, but now I think he goes by Kikali. And it was this very moody, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's almost like a Western and a monster book. And, but it's just very moody. It's, like lots of lights and darks and, harsh shadows and, guy wanders into town, there's monsters, there's children who kind of narrate through speaking with each other, basically. It's a very strange book, and it jumped out at me immediately visually, and the clarity of the vision all throughout. It was very simple vision, but it was like very clear all throughout. And it always stood out to me as very clear storytelling that was not wasteful.
Johnny, will you repeat the name again?
Sure. Los Tiempos Finales.
Los Tiempos.
It's got like a yellow cover and kind of like a octopus looking kind of creature on the front. Very graphic cover. Sam Heaty is what it says on the book, but now he goes by Kikali.
Okay. So I have some questions from our audience, and let me see here. So from Alexander Finbo, he says, nice to see you all and thanks for being on the panel. If you've worked with editors, what positive or negative experiences come to mind? Anyone? Have any of you worked with editors?
Not often. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Seth.
I was just going to say, I don't often work with editors. I have an editor at Drawn and Quarterly, Tracy Huron, but I mean, the process and like the history of like working with Drawn and Quarterly is not very collaborative. I mean, I've pretty much done my own work, and every once in a while, something comes up where they talk to me a little bit about something. But it's, I mean, I think the comics of the 80s, when I came up, the underground comics, just were not an editing world. I mean, we came up in a process where, first of all, there was no money in comics at all. So why would you have an editor? I mean, why would you let anyone tell you what to do or even suggest it? It's like, it's your work. You're putting it out there for nothing. You might as well do it the way you want. And no, the keys to production were very low. So I think a form developed where editing was at a lower ebb. I think there's a lot more graphic novel editors operating now through some of the companies that have come up through, you know, like First Second, or to some of the bigger publishers or whatever. And certainly the mainstream comics have editors, but I just don't have much experience with it. And I hate editing. I hate it.
Have any of the other three of you had an experience with an editor who was quite hands-on with your storytelling, or your even the cartooning?
I had the opposite experience with my editor at Conundrum Press, Andy Brown. I think everyone knows him.
Yeah.
He just basically, I sent him the thing and he just published it as is. I don't think he changed one single word or line. So it was brilliant. I love it.
Perfect.
I'm also published with Andy, and it was the same thing. I think you caught a couple typos, you know, and then it's depressed.
Well, you guys were born fully formed, so
Yeah. Well, I do have two big experiences with editors besides with Andy. I independently hire a comics editor to look over a lot of my work. Georgia Weber, she's fantastic. And so when I've applied for grants to do my books, I'll, you know, put a column in the budget to pay her. And she has done the same for me. So I will also edit her work. And it's really nice to have a trusted eye. So she's working in a formal comics editor role, but she's also kind of that, like, you know, when you're super deep in a project and you've lost perspective and you are having imposter syndrome and you think, why do I make anything? I'm garbage. Like, this is awful. Like, she's kind of that voice who's like, no, that this is working. So I find that very helpful. And then I also, with my nonfiction book that I'm working on, I won't name the publisher, but I was working with a big, or I was in talks for quite a while with a big American publisher. And in the end, we decided not to work together because the amount of changes that they wanted to make to the book was so far removed from my original concept. They wanted me to cut half of the content that I originally put in and add a new third of content that I had no intention of writing about. And they wanted it to be to a different age group. And like, so just, it was hardly recognizable as my own project, besides, like, you know, that one tagline premise was the same, and that was about it. And even though it would have been a really incredible opportunity to work with this particular publisher, I just couldn't do it. It felt like I was now working on, you know, work for hire, somebody else's script, even though it was supposed to be my own.
And Johnny, you've worked for larger mainstream publishers like Image, for instance. What is the editorial experience there?
Actually, with Image, there's no editorial. It's kind of like proofreading or what have you. Yeah, it's so purely creator owned that there's none. So my first few books with Image, it was just basically whatever me and my collaborators caught. But then on the last book, I did hire an editor. It's helpful to get feedback on what the thing is before it actually goes out the door. You know, so it was my editor Stephanie Cook was really good in terms of we saw eye to eye on what the you know, we had a nice long conversation. She understood what I was kind of going for. So she could be very helpful as kind of my Jiminy Cricket, going like, hey, do you want it to feel like this? Because this is what it feels like. So it was more like a kind of a check on kind of what was going
Reflecting
on.
it back.
It's kind of hard. Oh, sorry.
Oh, well, and then with Angel Capert over at Dark Horse and the Alien Project, Daniel Chabon was my editor there, and he's really great. He has very insightful notes. They aren't like wasteful or gratuitous. They're always right to the point where if he doesn't have anything to say, he doesn't say anything, which is very, very helpful. And now I'm getting used to I'm working over at Harper Alley now, and getting used to the notes on that side of things. So I'm like every step of the way, it's gone from like 0 notes to kind of like more notes, and getting it's been very instructive in every level of how notes can go, and kind of knowing what you need to say and what it's good when you have a clear vision. So when people come in with a lot of notes, you can kind of know like, okay, this is kind of what I need. And sometimes it's like, well, I'm really glad that they came in with that.
I'd like to try to get a couple more questions, and we've only got 10 minutes left. Jill Adamson wants to ask you guys, what in your own practice is still a challenge for you? Something you feel like you're still learning?
I think the hardest thing is actually just physically sitting and drawing for 10-hour days. It's hard on your body. For me, it's hard on my attention span too. I don't draw a lot of the truly sequential kind of panels. I can't draw a conversation like Seth can. Like I will start to go crazy. I have to really change my panels up. But yeah, I find that I love the whole comic making process. But the part I definitely like the least is actually just sitting and penciling in particular. It's hard. It's a lot of hours.
If you don't like sitting, don't become a writer of any description.
Well, for myself, I mean, the funny thing is, I mean, when aren't you always learning? Like, it's funny. It's like, I think like I'm working on a book right now that feels like the first book I know what I want to do. And it's, this is pretty late in the game. But I think that's the process you go through your whole life, where there's like, you keep thinking you've learned some vital new thing that makes you figure, oh, this is the one. Oh, now I know what I'm doing. It's like, there's always this process where there's a big learning curve in everything you're working on, I think. I mean, you build one skill at a time and you get more comfortable with that. I'm certainly more comfortable with the drawing now than I was when I was 25 years old. Then I would struggle with things. I don't struggle as much with stuff, if I have to draw somebody kneeling down, I could probably do it on the first try. Whereas when I was 25, I might, it might be like, I can't get it. I can't get the drawing to work. So you do get stuff under your belt. But it is funny that like, it's a laborious art form. It's boring to sit around and draw these sequential panels over and over again, especially like, if you've got like the same a headshot for 5 pages, that's boring. And I do think for myself, the one thing I'm really learning as I'm getting older is streamlining. The artwork is getting simpler and simpler because you need less to tell the story. And I don't want to spend the next 20 years, 20 years I've got left, getting one book done. I need to like speed it up a bit. So that means streamlining the drawing.
Right. We know how that feels. Rena?
Yeah, I can relate with what Megs was saying about, the hours and how tiring it can get. Me in particular, it's my eyes. Like they just go after 45 minutes. You have to keep getting up constantly, moving around. I find I'm not very fast as a result. So even if I want to get something done right away, right now I am working on a new book, and it's halfway done, but I'm in a hurry to get all of it done. And yet it seems like I can only work for 2 hours at a time. And then I'm wiped out. And then I have to do my regular day job. So I just wish I had more stamina. My eyes were better, just so I could just put more time into it. Also about what Seth was saying about learning. I find that after I've worked on something, then that's when I learn more about myself. It's not while I'm working on it. It's only after the fact. There's like a delayed reaction, and I realize, oh, that's what I was trying to figure out. Yeah. So, and that's always really fun. So now I'm working on this book of short stories, and I've had this in my mind for a long time. I've broken many stories down, written half the book out, and it's only now I'm like looking back at the first story I wrote months ago, and I'm going, oh, I see, that's what I, was figuring out in my head. So that part is really enjoyable. Yeah, there's always something to take from it.
Thank you. We're almost out of time. I'm going to choose one final question because it'll give you guys an opportunity to maybe address younger or newer cartoonists in the participants. I have a question from a gentleman who says, I've toyed with a graphic novel idea for years, but what stops me from moving forward is the fear that it has been done before. It feels contrived and I stop. I've started and stopped many times over the years. Do you experience this? Any advice dealing with this? And in the course of answering this question, each of you, could you also maybe just add the one thing that you wish you knew when you were starting out that you might pass on to younger writers and artists who are listening in tonight? Lorina, let's start with you. And
Yeah, I would say even if you're afraid, as Meg said earlier, you have imposter syndrome, you think what you're doing, no one's going to read it, who cares? It's boring, it's terrible. Just do it. I mean, you can either feel that way and do it or feel that way and not do it. So I would just say, just do it, and you'll, at least you've done it, and you have something to look back on, whether it is terrible or not, who's to say, but you'll feel better about yourself that you took action and you created something and made something happen. So that's what I would say to this, to Jean. And I would say that to myself as well. Stop wasting time worrying about if it's good or not, and just do it.
that's excellent advice. Seth, what's your response for Jean?
Well, yes, do it, first of all. There are no new ideas under the sun. It's really, it's what you do with it. And if this is your first graphic novel, it probably will be terrible, but that's okay, because you know what? You have to do each one at a time. The first work I worked on was terrible, and I can't even look at that stuff anymore. But it's like you have to, you got to start walking across the stones in the river to get to the other side. So you got to start with one. And, maybe you'll be lucky. Maybe it'll be great, actually. I've read some graphic novels by some people. Their first graphic novel was great.
Mine won awards. So
yeah, there you go. Yeah.
You're very lucky, Meags, because Seth has had most of these people killed.
That's right.
And
but I was going to say, the last thing I was going to say is, like, for advice for a young artist is that, you don't know who you are. It's like, it's too early to worry about like whether things are good or whether you know who you are. You'll only find out who you are by doing the work. That's how it happens. And it takes a long time. I'm still finding out who I am now. Like I said, I'm working on a book that feels like the first book that I know what I'm doing. That's a long process.
Yeah. The corollary for me in what you're saying, Seth, and what I say to creative writing students is, if you can stop, for God's sake, stop. Because the reason you keep going is because you are obsessed and you want to keep finding out whatever it is that is lighting your way through the act of creating your art. It's something that forces you to keep going. Johnny, what is still a challenge? Tell us what your response is to Jean, and maybe give us a little bit of insight into what you wish you'd known when you started.
Sure. I would say in terms of worrying that his work is a derivative or anything like that, you can give everyone on our panel here today the same idea, and you wouldn't even know it by the results of the book that came out of it. No matter what you have, whatever you want to say inside is going to be said within the context of that idea. So I wouldn't worry about that. Just move forward. And I would say move forward. That's the advice that I would give myself. That's the advice I would give young cartoonists. You just have to start moving. You can't get bogged down with self-doubt or anything. You just have to produce. And in so doing, like Seth says, you'll find yourself, and you'll refine what you want. You'll know what you want to say, and hopefully you'll start to get an idea of what you want to say, or what you like saying at the very least.
Okay, Meags will give you the final word on the struggle to be original, and any insights you might have to the young cartoonist among us.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Johnny said about the originality thing. I think you really don't have to worry about the idea being your own or not. You'll put your mark on it. And I think that when you're first making stuff, you're sort of looking for maybe a publisher's approval, or if it's getting a lot of likes on Instagram or whatever. And for as much as you can, for as long as you can, try not to worry about that too much. Don't worry about, when I sold this zine, how much money did it make versus, the person at the table next to me. Like, when you're just figuring out who you are, those external sort of signifiers can actually be a lot less helpful, so just, there's not a lot of money in comics. It's hard to make it big. It's its own nightmare when you actually do make it big and comics start paying your bills, because that becomes a whole other thing. But when you're just starting out, remember to make it for yourself and to enjoy it.
I like that. That's a good place to end, that you should be enjoying what you're doing rather than imposing any kind of outside consideration upon it. This was a very, very interesting discussion. I want to thank all four of you. And I don't know if you're aware, but you had over 70 folks eavesdropping on you tonight. And I think they got a lot out of it. So thank you very much for being here tonight, Seth, Rena, Meags, and Johnnie. And stay well and stay healthy. I think now we are to turn off our cameras and vanish into the night while Ilana sings us out.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks,
Great
Michael.
job.
Appreciate
Nice.
Yeah.
It was my
Thanks,
pleasure, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Good evening.
If I could sing, I would. I just want to say thank you so much, Michael, Johnnie, Meags, Lorina, and Seth, for lending us your time and talent tonight. That really was a most edifying and immersive and entertaining conversation. So thank you. For anyone out there who might have missed tonight's event, please know that the video will be available on our website and YouTube channel in the coming days. I hope to see you all back here in May, when we'll focus on Asian Heritage Month with some interesting South Asian, East Asian writers to kick things off. Again, thank you very much for coming out. We really appreciate it, and good night.